Now available. Paperback and Kindle Unlimited. ISIS, the main event. It's carnage inside of a steel cage when the goddess next door steps in the squared circle with the beast from the boss in this action-packed all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, the main event, paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. One of my viewers wanted to know what a gimmick was after watching my videos on the High Value Man. And a gimmick is defined in the dictionary as a device intended to attract publicity or business or attention. And the primary focus of a gimmick is usually something that is designed to get people's attention and get people talking and get publicity for something as related to a business or a product. Now, my first experience with a gimmick was from two places. The first place I experienced gimmicks was in pro wrestling, and the second place I experienced gimmicks was in comic books. So that's how I became familiar with the concept of a gimmick, and that's how I became familiar with it so well that I was able to use it as one of my approaches in writing my stories. Now, when I experienced the gimmick in the world of wrestling, it was all about learning about how to create characters, because most wrestlers, when they enter a wrestling league like the WWE or AEW, they usually have a gimmick to be able to make themselves appealing to the audience, because the gimmick is all about creating this character who can attract attention and get the wrestler over with the audience, get the people talking about this wrestler on different magazines and different message boards, and get that publicity and get that wrestler over with the fans so that he can start advancing up the card in the business of wrestling. That's what a gimmick is designed to do, because a wrestler like John Cena cannot get over by just being John Cena, a guy with good ring work in the ring, because being a great wrestler alone is just not going to be enough to sell this wrestler to the audience. No, a wrestler needs a gimmick to be able to get that attention from the audience, stand out from the crowd to get that publicity, and be able to get further over in the business to move further up the card. Because most wrestlers are, when they start out, they are usually at the bottom of a card of a wrestling league. And if you're at the bottom of the card, especially in the world of the dark matches, which come on before the show, and you don't have any sort of hook to grab the audience and get their attention, you're going to go nowhere, because a guy named John Cena, a guy named Dwayne Johnson, a guy named Mark Calloway, a guy named Steve Williams is not going to be strong enough on their own in the beginning in order to get over with the audience, because they don't have anything there to grab people's attention. Because watching Mark Calloway versus Dwayne Johnson isn't going to be very compelling, but watching The Rock versus The Undertaker is going to be something compelling, because both of those people have a gimmick to get them over with the audience, and they have that gimmick to get them the attention and publicity to get people excited enough in order to go out here and want to go watch this match on TV, or even more so, get so excited they want to go out here and spend money to watch that same wrestling match on a pay-per-view. But a gimmick is always used with a character who, in the beginning, to start to get this talent over, because the talent is weak on its own. And the talent is weak on its own because the audience doesn't know enough about the talent to care about the talent. So this goes back to a tenet of screenwriting, what I talked about in many other videos, and that tenet is, why should we care? And the gimmick is designed to make the audience care about this character and care enough about this character that they have an incentive to invest in this character and their stories. So the gimmick is all about helping the wrestler develop their character and helping that character get a connection with the audience so that they can go out here and sell the tickets to the wrestling show and get people invested in the story. Now, the gimmick usually in the beginning, again, is all about getting that attention, but after the gimmick gets the wrestler over with the audience and gets them the attention of the audience, what happens after that is up to the talent, because the talent has to go out here and develop this character, and as they develop this character, that is what gets the character over with the audience and gets people connected with the character enough to care about the character and continue to want to continue watching the shows featuring this character. So when you have a wrestler, they may start out with one gimmick, like your Rocky Maivia. When he first started out, he started out with the gimmick of Rocky Maivia, and then he started to go from there to the Nation of Domination with a pro-black gimmick to further develop his character. And then eventually, Dwayne Johnson developed into The Rock, which became an icon in the world of pro wrestling. Because when you have gimmicks, they usually are about further developing the character, evolving the character, and as time goes by, the character eventually evolves into someone that the audience connects with, relates to, identifies with, and is so compelled to see that they want to go out here and watch this person regularly every week. So that's all a part of gimmicks. And again, gimmicks are integral to developing characters in things like pro wrestling, because an athlete all by themselves is weak, but the gimmick helps the athlete get over with the audience because it gives them somebody to relate to, somebody to identify with, somebody to care about. And if people don't care about your character, they're not going to be interested in investing in their stories. So gimmicks are very important to storytelling, because gimmicks in the world of storytelling give us something to hook on and give us a reason to care about that character in the beginning. But then later on, that character has to carry the story all by themselves, because eventually, after time passes by, we go from seeing the gimmick and we start seeing the person. And when we start seeing the person, we really start to see somebody we really want to see all the time. And that's what happens with many of your pro wrestlers with the gimmicks. The gimmicks can only do but so much, but it's up to the wrestler to carry that and give that extra dimension. So you'll have, in most characters, 3 dimensions. You have the external, which is the gimmick. You have the external, which is the person wearing the gimmick. And then you have the internal. And the internal is extremely important because it's what is inside of the person that brings out the character, and it's the character that eventually evolves past the gimmick. Now, the second place I learned all about gimmicks was in the world of comic books. And as somebody who has been reading comics since he was 4 years old, I learned about gimmicks very quickly, about characters in storytelling in comics. Now, your gimmicks, usually in comics, are also related to the character, and they're all about getting the character over with the audience. Now, these gimmicks can either be superpowers or they can be storylines. Now, many superheroes, they have a gimmick as related to their superpowers, and that gimmick is usually the thing that gets people's attention from the visual. That's one part of the gimmick with some of these characters. Like, for example, Captain America has an all-American gimmick. Wolverine has this anti-hero gimmick. Your Colossus has a turning into steel gimmick. Iron Man has the armor as the gimmick. And the gimmick, again, is all about the visual and getting your attention with that design. But then, as you take a look at the visual, then you are drawn into the character. And the gimmick, again, is only one aspect of it, because it's about getting us to get to know this person and getting us to care about this person. Because, yes, this superhero will have these powers that will draw us in on the visual of the comic book cover, but that's only to draw us in so that we can start reading the story about this character, and this story is the thing that makes us care about the character. So, yes, you'll have the visual gimmick in the comic for the superhero that will get our attention, but it is up to the writer to write a compelling character that makes us care about that character to the point where we're compelled to pick up that issue off whatever comic book shop we're at, or go out here and look for back issues featuring that character. That's what a gimmick is all about, drawing you in, and then the characters have to do the work. And as the characters progress, that makes us care about the series and care enough to keep buying the series. So that's all about writing. Again, the gimmick, it's just a visual trick that gets your attention, and then once you come in and see how good it is, you then are really interested in buying more. Now, I also learned about gimmicks from comics as related to storylines that were presented in the 1990s. Now, your Infinity Gauntlet was what many people call a gimmick storyline, because it was all about this gimmick of the Infinity Stones, and this gimmick was designed to get the incredibly weak character of Thanos over with the next generation. Now, the Thanos character, he was known in the 1970s, but kids in the 90s didn't know who he was. So to get the character of Thanos over with kids in the 90s, they came up with the storyline of the Infinity Gauntlet. And the storyline of the Infinity Gauntlet was all about Thanos getting these Infinity Stones and this gauntlet to control all things in the universe. Now, those Infinity Stones were the gimmick, and this was designed to get your Thanos over as a major villain in the Marvel Universe. So this was designed to make us care about Thanos, because this was designed to present him as a credible threat, because on his own, he could not carry himself as a villain. He wouldn't be compelling enough on his own to carry a story without these Infinity Stones and his obsession with death. This is the thing that drew us in, because these stones were bright and colorful. This character had all of these powers, and this was a thing that drew us in. And gimmick storylines, they are good at drawing new customers into a product and getting them to go out here and not only buy the books of a series like Infinity Gauntlet, but also to go out here and try some of the other books at Marvel Comics. So a gimmick storyline is all about marketing, and it's all about drawing you in with this one hook, with this gimmick, to pull you in with the hopes and anticipation that you will buy more products. So gimmicks and the comic book story, as related to comic book storytelling, is all about sales, and gimmicks primarily are all about sales, because the wrestler is trying to go out here and be able to show that he can draw and sell tickets to the shows, and that's what a wrestler is trying to do with his gimmick, whether it be John Cena when he started out as the prototype, then became the Doctor of Thugonomics, then became the American Soldier or the Superman John Cena, All-American. They're all designed to sell tickets, and they're also designed to move a talent further up the wrestling card from the bottom all the way up to the main event, because the ultimate goal of a gimmick is to drive those sales so that that wrestler can reach the main event, or for that comic book to reach the levels of millions of sales. And those are the goals of a gimmick. A gimmick, as related to writing, is about creating this external hook for a character to get that character over with the audience, and then that hook being the thing that gets people compelled enough to care about that person in order for them to generate sales. Now, I have characters on the SJS Direct imprint that have used gimmicks, like, for example, the E-Steam character used to use a demon gimmick as related to her character. She started out as this demon, and then eventually, over time, as the people got to know the E-Steam character, eventually she started being able to carry herself in her own stories. So that's what happens with a character with a good gimmick. A good character with a good gimmick is going to be able to eventually wind up carrying themselves and standing out on their own, like the E-Steam character did, where she started out early on in her series with changing into a demon, but then eventually wound up being able to start carrying herself in her own stories as early as the Witches of Eastland and Little Girl Lost, where she practically was not wearing the demon face anymore, and people liked the character for who she was, and eventually were out here willing to go out here and buy the character in her own stories, like your Goddess of, and like E-Steam Ascension and the Sands of Time. Eventually, they started to get into the character, and they liked the character for herself. The same thing with the John Hayes character, who has a supernatural gimmick type story, but eventually people started to get to know the character over the course of several stories, like Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, Bride of Dracula, and then his own books like The Conversation with Death, The Man Who Rules the World, and Dark Succubus, and The Man with Nothing to Lose. And that's all about character development and character progression. When your character eventually evolves, they no longer need gimmicks to carry themselves, and they can eventually start carrying themselves and carrying their own stories, and people will start to anticipate them. But most people think that a gimmick is something that is one way, but it's not. And again, most companies do use gimmicks in the beginning, but eventually, once people start to get to know the quality of the products, the reputation of the products, or the reputation of the characters, then people start to see the content of that person's character, and they no longer need to use a hook to sell you. Eventually, they wind up selling themselves, because the ultimate goal is to move past the gimmick and then start selling yourself. And that can be either done in wrestling, comics, or even in real life. Eventually, you reach a point where it's no longer you putting on some sort of outfit or you putting on some sort of look. It is you standing out there and you standing up for yourself, and people start to see you, and that is the thing that draws them in, and they know they can trust you because they know that you're not going to give them any sort of poor quality. Now, the insecure people, they will go out here and try to use a gimmick to try to sell people, and eventually they will wind up falling because people will see past the gimmick, because there's nothing there of substance to keep you there. But a person eventually, they start moving past the gimmick and you start seeing them, and that's when people start to form a genuine relationship with the characters in things like a wrestling show, things like a comic book, or even in real life, because that person is being genuine, they're being themselves, and they don't need some sort of crutch to hang on to, because when you hold on to a gimmick for too long, what happens is you start using it as a crutch, And when you start using it as a crutch, you can't carry things over. And this is what we saw happen at Marvel Comics in the 1990s. They used a lot of gimmicks to try to get characters and stories over, trying to shock people over and over again. And that was because the writers had not learned the skills in order to be able to develop a story organically. Because yes, people will use gimmicks in the beginning to get the character over, but eventually you reach a point where that character has to start carrying their own stories organically. And if they don't do that, you keep using one gimmick after the other to shock the audience. And then what happens is the audience becomes apathetic because they're just tired of all it being shocked, and they wind up walking away. So that's why it's important to understand the concept of gimmicks. Gimmicks are something that can be used in the short term, but they cannot be used long term. They can be used to get people's attention for a moment, but eventually a creator has to start showing how creative and imaginative they are and start really showing how they're going to present something compelling either on the page, in the ring, or in business. Because if you cannot go out here and take that short-term attention you're getting and turn it into long-term business, then the whole idea of a gimmick just falls completely apart, and you're not going to be able to keep that attention that you get. Because yes, a gimmick will get people's attention for a moment, but the effort to keep that person's attention is based on what you present and who you are. If you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, or the Spinsterella trilogy, or the Thetas, or my men's issues books like the Man Crisis, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can find them on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.